No matter where we are in our walks of life, we all struggle with purpose and identity. Join us on the search for something better, real hope, peace, and meaning. Welcome to the Something Better podcast with your hosts, Michelle and April. Hey everyone, we're so glad that you've joined us for another episode of the Something Better podcast. On this show, we like to share conversations with people from all walks of life, all different backgrounds, and discuss what it really means to have purpose, meaning, and peace, truly something better. And we love our listeners, and we definitely want to learn more about you. So if you're listening to this episode and you're enjoying it or you have a question, you can head over to our website at somethingbetter.us/podcast, and you'll find a form at the bottom of the page where you can ask a question, share feedback, or leave a comment. Well, we have a great show for you today, as always. I'm excited to introduce you to our guest, Michael Perron. He has a powerful story that I think you're going to really enjoy. And his story is about pursuing his purpose in life and really sharing strength and hope with others. And Michael, it's great to have you on the show today.
Well, it's great to be with you all as well. Thank you.
Could you go ahead and share with our listeners just a little bit about yourself? We know you do a lot outside of work and daily life, so go ahead and briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. My daily life now is being the father to 3 children and the husband of an amazing wife. We have a 20-year-old who is in college. We have a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school. And then we have a 5-year-old who was a gift that was given to us by her mom at birth. And so we are all over the spectrum, running around chasing after each one of those, but really grateful for the opportunity to have the children and obviously be married for over 21 years now.
Hi, Michael. We are really excited to have you here. I'd like to maybe back up just a little bit. You have been through quite a journey in your life, and that I understand has led you to find your true purpose and your identity. If you don't mind, take us back to how you grew up and your background, just get to know you a little bit more.
Certainly. Thanks for asking. You know, my purpose in life from a very young age was to be perfect. I was raised with a loving mom and dad. You could call it almost a Leave It to Beaver kind of environment. I mean, we lived in the suburbs, had a father that worked, had a mom that pretty much stayed at home the whole time, had a younger sister. And things were good, but in my head, I created this concept and this idea that I needed to be perfect. The way that you would like me, I thought, was if I did everything extremely well and to perfection. And so that's the way I grew up. I grew up with a performance mentality. So if I was going to be an athlete, I had to be the best athlete. If I was going to be a student, I had to be the best student. If I was going to do anything, if I couldn't do it well, most likely I probably wouldn't participate in it. Instead, I would find something else that I could excel at as well. And that was pretty much my upbringing. It was content. It was peaceful. There was no trauma, so to speak, in my upbringing. But I was basing my value and my worth on something that I could never attain. So what I did about the age of 15 was almost abandon that thought process because I realized I couldn't be perfect enough or good enough to earn people. Not everybody was going to like me, I guess is where I arrived at. And about the age of 15, I started drinking alcohol and using drugs. And that was kind of my coping mechanism, where I figured if I couldn't be good enough and I couldn't be perfect enough, I couldn't perform well enough, I could anesthetize. And that pain or that shame or that guilt of not matching up to who I thought you needed me to be would pretty much, be done with the bottle or with drugs, which led me into that lifestyle. High school, I managed to make it through by really the skin of my teeth and get into college. And then college kicked in, and that's where the troubles really became pronounced.
Did you go to college locally, or were you out on your own at that point in terms of being in a environment where you could just continue to expand?
Well, good question. So for me, I managed to maintain the performance mentality. So I had my group of friends that I would go to church with. I had my group of friends that I would party with, and I had my group of friends that I would be in athletics with. I prayed that none of them would ever come in contact with one another because they would discover that I was being an imposter the entire time to each group. And so I left home as I graduated from high school about the age of 17. That's, like I said, when I went out. And in the midst of that is where my troubles really, really kicked in. And so I was unbridled. I didn't have anybody else around me to tell me what to do. And so I began to form my own reality, my own identity. And it was really surrounding more of the drug culture. I tried to do well in school. You can't do really well when you're hungover. I tried to do well in athletics, but you really can't perform when you filled your lungs with all kinds of things over the weekend. And so ultimately it led me into a mode of, I can't do this. And so I bombed out of college, quite frankly. Managed to call my father on an afternoon and have a real heart-to-heart conversation with him about what was going on in my life. And it was in that moment, I think for the first time in a really long time, I got honest and I said, Dad, I'm really in trouble here. I can't seem to get my life straight and I can't seem to find my purpose. Can you help me? And he asked me, well, what's going on? And I, again, told him what was happening. He came down and got me out of college and brought me back to my home state, which is Minnesota. And I went through a drug treatment program there. But I went through it for all the wrong reasons. I didn't go through it because I thought I had a problem. I went through it because I thought that's what my parents needed from me, or I thought that's what would look good to other people around me. And so I went through drug treatment, got out, and then a week later got a DUI. So obviously it didn't work the first time. The second time through drug treatment for me, something clicked. There was an understanding that I had that, this may be a little bit more than me just trying to make myself look good. And I managed to stay sober for about 1.5 years, but it was all about me white knuckling it. It was all about me just holding on for dear life, knowing the entire time that there was a train on the tracks and it was coming for me. And I was standing right in the middle of the tracks.
Did you have support during that time? Obviously, your parents were pretty open if you could actually have that discussion with them. But did you have others around you that were trying to support you? Or are there other things that were either helping or hurting you during that time?
This is a great question. For me, the answer to the question is yes, I did have support, but I did not take advantage of it. I wasn't willing to do what other people were asking me to do. So the treatment counselors would say, Michael, here's what we believe that you need to do. Well, I had a better way, which was my way. And so my arrogance and my pride in the midst of my addiction kept me in bondage, kept me going right back out again to the drugs and the alcohol. So I did have the support, but I wasn't willing to do and humble. It was really about humbling myself. And I think so often, for me at least, because I knew the right answers and I knew what to say and I had the terminology of treatment, I could make you think that I'm actually a little bit further along in my recovery from drugs than I really was. And that just led me down a path in which I could tell you what you wanted to hear and I could put on the good show, but I was really miserable.
Where was God in all of this at that time? Where were you on your spiritual journey, if at all? Was it just a complete shell, I don't want to hear about that? Or did you even think about turning that way?
Well, I was raised in an environment in church in which the concept of God that I had was really about this old man with a white beard and a gavel in his hand and a long dark robe, just waiting for me to mess up. And
I think a lot of people have that kind of a picture of what God is, right?
And so that's the concept that I had. And so I'm just waiting for him to punish me, and I'm just waiting for lightning to strike, all these images that we have in our head. And that relationship was, again, founded on performance. And so it made my problem even worse because I realized, man, I just cannot get myself out of this hole. There's no possible way I could ever earn enough to have God keep me in his favor as opposed to keeping me in his punishment.
And what was it? I'm kind of curious, like, a lot of people, as you described your college life, may try drugs or partying or whatnot. What was it for you that you were really wanting more and more of that, or it kind of led to the extreme?
For me, it was a matter of I just wanted to feel different. I was so uncomfortable with my identity and who I was, this chameleon, this imposter that I created, that it really didn't matter to me whether it was alcohol or whether it was cocaine or whether it was, even girlfriends, even things that are outside of drugs, but whatever it was, I just wanted to experience anything but what I was feeling inside. And so that's why for me, I just continued to try to go after searching for wholeness, searching for purpose, and searching for peace in my life. And I figured if one is good, then three must be better. And that's the mentality that I had. And I think a lot of people go through that.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like, well, like you said, you really had a lot of pain, and ultimately you're searching for something to fill that. And so you've tried all these different approaches. And then at what point, because it sounds like you make strides and then maybe you go back to it and you're still not finding what you're looking for. So at what point in your journey do you just say, enough is enough? I really want to change this time. And then how is that possible? How do you find the strength to do that?
Well, for me, it came to a head. I got involved in fitness. Fitness was something that I took up at the age of about 15 or 16. Again, the irony of me being involved in fitness and yet I'm getting drunk every weekend. It's just that imposter. But fitness led me into a tremendous amount of success. I had a television show. I was part of Time Warner. I was part of ESPN. I did national magazines for fitness, men's fitness, and all these other things. And so from a worldly perspective, I had everything that the world would tell you should make you content and hopeful and happy. I had girlfriends, I had money, I had success, I had fame, I had all these things that the world would communicate to you. You've arrived. You have found your purpose in life, and you are on the mountaintop. The problem was I was absolutely miserable. I remember it was 2:00 in the morning and I had turned over into harder drugs. I was using methamphetamine on a daily basis. And it was 2:00 in the morning and I'm sitting there with all this stuff, like a car, a girl, everything that the world would say, a great condo that I owned. And I just thought, is this it? Is this all there is? Because I have everything and yet I am absolutely all alone. I'm absolutely miserable. A woman had shared the message of Jesus with me about 3 years previously. And she said, there's forgiveness and there's hope and there's peace that you can receive through this person of Jesus Christ. Is that something you would like to do? And in my arrogance, I said, no, I'm okay. I'm good. And that just showed you really just where I was. I was completely lost. But that was the point, getting back to that story of being awake at 2:00 in the morning, in which I realized I had taken everything that the world has, and I still didn't have a purpose. I still didn't have a true identity. And it was in that moment, I really believe, call it whatever you will, I had this prompting, I need to get back to church, whatever that looked like. And remember, my concept of God was still about this punishing, dogmatic thing, but I knew there had to be more. And maybe it wasn't God that was punishing me. Maybe it was me that was punishing me. And so I became willing to explore the idea that maybe my concept of God really wasn't the right one. And I went into a church and I could do church still. Like I said, I could still put on the show. And in the middle of that service, I heard a message from a woman, believe it or not, a total stranger. And she just looked at me and she said, young man, I don't know who you are, but I really want to encourage you because I want to tell you that God can restore everything you've given away. And it was in that moment, I believe, for me, that God became real. It wasn't this idea of this long-robed, penal, punishing, trite God. He could talk to a junkie in the middle of a church through this lady. I thought, I need to get to know this God a little bit more.
I was just wondering how you did that. So you had something that triggered you to explore, but then where do you start?
Well, as I mentioned before, formerly, I was not willing to do what other people asked me to do because I had all the answers. But in that moment in which I came to an understanding that, you know what, I might actually be wrong about this idea of God, I turned to others in the church and I asked them for help. And I said, look, if you had a minute, could we grab lunch or coffee sometimes? Because I have a lot of questions about this God. Because as I told them, because I think the God that you know is not the God that I know. And so I'd like to begin to understand a little bit more of how you see God, because the one I see doesn't make me want to pursue him. But when I look at you guys, all I see is there's hope. It doesn't mean that there's not trouble. It doesn't mean that there's not suffering or pain in your life, but you still walk around with almost this little smile on your face. And I'm like, I want that. I want that in my life. So can you help me? So I asked for help, and then I became willing to do what they said.
Wow, it's great that you had that because, of course, in so many of the situations today and in today's society in the U.S., people don't always have that impression of people that are Christ followers, right? They don't see that perspective. So it's wonderful that you actually saw people that had that love and you wanted to see what that was like for yourself. So that's really great. I know one thing we would hope is that more people would meet people like that. That love that Jesus has is so great. It's just pouring right out, where people can get connected with that. But you were dealing with a couple of different things, right? Between getting involved on your spiritual journey and trying to have that relationship with Jesus. I am curious, how did it progress from there and what got you to where you are today?
Okay, so it began, like I said, with me asking somebody for help and became willing to do what they encouraged me to do. There wasn't ever a moment in those relationships where I was ever told, you have to do this in order to be successful. It was really more of somebody sharing their experience, somebody sharing their strength, and somebody looking at me, even though I went, with all my background and all the baggage and all the stuff, and they were able to look at me and say, you know what, I'm really sorry what you went through, but you don't have to live like that anymore. You really don't. I want to say that, after that experience in that church, everything was great, but it wasn't, because about 3 months later, I decided that I'm going to try drugs one more time, and I relapsed. And that's, I think, a message that for somebody out there that's listening right now, that you really need to hear. It's really the walk with God in Christ is about progress, not perfection. It's about progressing into who God says you are. And there's going to be hiccups along the way. I'm not giving you an excuse, but what I'm saying is don't run away from God if you happen to mess up. Get honest again. I got honest right away. And I went to the guys that were helping me and I said, man, I messed up. And they embraced me. They said, well, here, let's try this instead. And they gave me a few more things to put into place and to put into practice. And that began the process for me to where I began having a deeper understanding of who Christ is, the fact that he does care for us and love us, even in the midst of our sin, and that it's up to me now to agree with what he says about me. He says I'm beloved. He says I'm cared for. He says that I'm cherished, and really walk in that, as opposed to looking at, what is happening in my life and just say I'm miserable and I'm no good and I'm nothing but a sinner saved by grace. That's just a lie.
Well, you obviously had a combination of practical help from good people that were supporting you and also that spiritual progress that you were making. It sounds like, too, you do need both of those, especially with that kind of situation. So if someone came to you today and said, hey, what do I do? Or how do I find God, but I'm also dealing with whatever kind of struggles they're in, whether it's addiction or other things, what would you tell them to do?
For me, it was a combination of both. So it wasn't the church that put me on the road to recovery, although it did help. It wasn't treatment that put me on a road to wholeness, but it did help. It was a combination of both working together. And so I would encourage somebody that if they're in a struggle right now, if they're in a battle, find an environment in which you look around the congregation or the people that you happen to run into and just really see, do they have hope? Do they have joy? Now, granted, you can find somebody in any church that is a hypocrite. I mean, I'm not, if you look for it, you're going to find it. But overall, there's probably one or two people in that environment that you just say, you know what? I don't know who that person is, but I kind of want what they have. Maybe I can talk to them a little bit more. Hopefully they'll talk to you. And what I'd encourage somebody to do as well is if they are in a battle with addiction, AA works wonderfully. Narcotics Anonymous works wonderfully. And all those processes working together, I believe, is what really creates the platform that we can begin to build our lives upon and then walk in the wholeness that Christ offers to everybody.
I love it. Well, you definitely have a very powerful and encouraging story. And I know that our listeners today, those who can relate, to any aspect of your story, have definitely been encouraged. We'd like to take a second to reiterate what Michael shared. The goal of our faith journey is not perfection, it's progress. If you're currently struggling with any addiction, please check out the resources Michael shared for practical tips on recovery and treatment plans. And if you're ready to take that next step in your spiritual recovery, then we would love to chat with you. Send us a message on any of our social channels or head to our website. We'll be ready to connect. Now back to our conversation with Michael. Michael, could you go ahead and share with us a verse or quote that has really played a significant role in your life and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the one that I turned to at the very beginning of this whole process is found in the book of 2 Corinthians. And it's this guy named Paul, and he's talking about his experiences in life. And he says, even though he knows Jesus, he says, you know what? There was given to me a thorn in my flesh, which really is a messenger of Satan to remind him to stay humble. And he began to understand in the midst of that thorn in his flesh, this memory or this reminder that, he's not all that when he is humbled, when he is weak, when he doesn't have all the answers, that's actually when Christ's power and strength can abound. In other words, it can be recognized because he realizes that it's really not his strength or his power or his acumen or his experience that is giving him the peace that surpasses his understanding. It's actually that in his weakness, God's power is made perfect. And I really think for me, that's the verse that I turn to because, listen, I want to tell you that, for the last 21 years that I've been sober, everything's been wonderful. But it hasn't been. We've had a son that was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He's fine now. But, in the midst of that, what am I going to do? Am I going to go back to drinking and drugging, or am I going to press into who I know God to be? We've had situations over and over again in which life hasn't been perfect, but I do know Jesus. And I do know his plan for my life. And we have been able to walk through those things with confidence, even though we've been weak, because God's power is made perfect in the midst of our weakness.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. Where can our listeners connect with you online?
Well, if they want to, I'm old school. I'm over the age of 50, so I use Facebook. So they can probably contact me through Facebook if they wanted to. They can contact me through Instagram if they want to. It's at Michael Perron, or they can contact me even personally via email. You'd send a message to liferecovery@prestonwood.org. Again, liferecovery@prestonwood.org.
Thanks. Well, thank you again for sharing with us today. We'll be sure to link up where people can find you on the episode page as well. And we really appreciate it. I think you really have encouraged a lot of people today. So thanks so much, Michael.
It's an honor to be with you all. God bless you.
Jesus truly is something better, the answer to our search for meaning and identity. He can bring real purpose and joy to your life. We'd love to help you get to know him. So connect with us online at somethingbetter.us/podcast. And if you're ready to begin a relationship with him today, just click the Learn More button. On our site, you'll also find previous episodes, and you can share your feedback with us in a voice message. We release a new episode every 2 weeks, so be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Did you enjoy today's episode? Take a screenshot of the episode on your phone and tag us on Instagram at @FindSomethingBetter. We'd love your help in sharing this great content with others. Thanks for joining us today. See you next time.